Cartoons, whether they're made for kids or grown-ups or absolutely everyone, aren't obligated to be educational. It's not required that animated shows and movies have some larger message about ethics or how a person should be. It's art, and I think we've moved past a point where we, as a people, feel that all art needs to do a particular thing to be considered good. Still, I understand why children's entertainment has all these added expectations. I understand why parents would want to know that when their kids are watching TV, they're getting something positive out of it, not just entertainment value. But when creators are forced to jam specific lessons into their work by outside forces, there's a huge risk that the quality of the show will suffer and that viewers will be able to tell how disingenuous that messaging is and subsequently ignore the advice being given. The case in point here would be the PSA cartoons of the 80s, where influence from the federal government resulted in ham-fisted episodes and TV specials, or just isolated PSA spots that told kids not to do bad things in the most obvious ways possible. Were these efforts effective? Did they teach kids to stay away from drugs and strangers? Well, it would be really hard to say accurately, but if we move the discussion to similarly moralistic animation from the late 90s and very early 2000s, I can speak from personal experience and say that they weren't convincing in the least. Wow, is this still the intro? Let's break for a title card, huh? I actually liked Arthur growing up. I don't know if that makes me a square, but it was an okay show. Given its nature as original programming for public television, it makes a lot of sense that it was squeaky clean and tried to have positive messaging throughout. But when Arthur went out of its way to be extra educational or moralistic, I tuned out. In general, I think kids over the age of 5 are really good at sniffing out heavy-handed point-making in their entertainment, or really just anything that doesn't quite fit. So this brings us to a dilemma. If morality tales in kids' entertainment need to be really subtle to work, then should we even bother with them or just let entertainment for kids be entertaining? Everybody's free to disagree, but I do think it's possible for kids' entertainment to have positive messaging, and it doesn't need to be limited to common PSA stuff about staying away from drugs and strangers with candy. I've talked previously about a contemporary show that does this really well, Summer Camp Island, which, by the way, has been moved wholesale to HBO Max. I'm still not completely sold on that decision. I mean, I get that HBO Max really needs exclusive programming, but it also limits access to the series overall, and I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. But even contemporary shows with positive messaging owe a lot to a beloved 90s series that set the gold standard, probably without even trying. We're talking about Hey Arnold here, so let's take a few moments to indulge in the warm, addictive nostalgia that the title brings with it. Remember the intro where they're walking on the street for some reason, and there's that episode where they take a train to hell, kind of, or they clean up the vacant lot and turn it into a baseball diamond. Oh man, it's great, isn't it? But what we're really here to talk about is how Hey Arnold very passively encouraged viewers to be good people. One of the biggest compliments I can give to Hey Arnold as a show is that it's pretty uncomfortable to rewatch. More specifically, it's uncomfortable to be in the world of Hey Arnold, but not in a bad way. It looks and feels like a not so nice neighborhood in a very real city. In fact, the boarding house Arnold lives in is described as a tenement in the Wikipedia article about the show. The show's interior environments, that's hard to say, in general, have a consistent sleaze. Well, outside of Arnold's bedroom, which is just like a kid fantasy bachelor pad. But even with that dirt and grime, the neighborhood still has a sense of charm, and I think any kid who watched it growing up kind of wanted to live there. And that mix of gross and lovely bleeds into the characters too, which is what we'll be focusing on today. This is just so different from most mainstream television, especially mainstream television of the time. Whether it's a live action show or an animated series, TV characters tend to live in pristine houses and apartments that, in reality, would be extremely expensive. But long before shows like Bob's Burgers and Man-Seeking Woman created dingy, realistic homes for their characters, Hey Arnold created this incredibly grounded feeling. But the setting itself is just one ingredient. The real strength of the show was its characters and the kinds of problems they faced. Arnold alone is a great example of a character who hasn't been dealt dealt a fair hand life-wise, but chooses to do the right thing anyway. But instead, we're going to be focusing on a different character in this chunk of the video. I could have picked just about any member of the main cast because while they all adhere to good character writing by each having an easily identifiable personality trait, none are limited to their surface level traits. Harold isn't just a bully, Lila isn't just Ms. Perfect, and Gerald isn't just some helpful sidekick. And 20-some years after the show first aired, I can see that one central character was much more than just an antagonist. Growing up, Helga was probably my least favorite character, at least for a while. I mean, just look at her. She yells a lot, she's kind of creepy, and in general, she's just plain mean. But the show started to give the character some more breathing room, first with those moments in the Arnold shrine, which are still a bit concerning, but also with her own episodes where we started to understand a lot more about why she acted the way she did. We got to meet her parents, who are, in my script it just says to pause for about 10 seconds or so. Her parents are pieces of work, we could say, but above all their other faults, they definitely don't express any real affection for Helga because all of that attention goes to the perfect older sister, Olga? I think her name's Olga. And boy, is that a great episode when we get to see her come back and she gets all the attention and everything. And still, with all these horrible things she has to deal with, in moments where Helga is forced to make a tough choice, she usually does the right thing. Despite her situation, which we can very safely say is not ideal and potentially even harmful to her well-being, she still shows compassion. It's impressive enough that a kid's show explained why a character wound up as a bully, but it's something else entirely that the show then lets the character change. I'm trying to think of another character from a 90s animated kid show that got to have this much emotional range, and if you can think of one, I mean, I guess put it in the comments because I've got nothing. Helga has problems. Helga has real problems, and anyone out there with real problems can tell you how rare it is to come across a character who feels this relatable. Helga Pataki knows exactly what it's like to be surrounded by people who apparently just get to be happy, who just get to be successful and popular without having to put in much effort. And Helga knows what it's like to look into the future and see nothing of interest, just more slog and disappointment. And with all that hanging over her, she still does the right thing, most of the time. Now go ahead and tell me that's not a helpful concept in August of the year 2020. Here's my address right here. Come to my house and tell me right now that this message is not relevant. The real value of realism and content made for kids is that it adds a lot more color, and I mean that in a symbolic storytelling kind of sense. It adds depth to the characters and the environment, and in the case of Hey Arnold, it means that no character, at least among the main cast, is purely a protagonist or an antagonist. No one is pure good or pure evil, and that gives the show's subtle lessons so much more impact. And yeah, realistic settings aren't the only way to break down outmoded views of right and wrong. Miyazaki, for one, accomplishes the same thing with extremely fantastical and even escapist settings. But the reason Hey Arnold worked so well for me is that I believed all of it. I believed the characters because I understood their motivations, which was especially powerful when it came to the characters I didn't like at first. I will never make the argument that all stories need some kind of gritty realism, because that's just not the case. One narrative approach isn't inherently better than any other, and each one has its own strengths. But here's my analogy. Comparing these two things, sort of more realistic kids content and more fun times, fantastical content, we can compare these two things to like any relationship you've had with another person, whether it's a friendship or a romantic relationship or what have you. Most kids shows, the really light ones that aren't very realistic at all, they're kind of like the early days of getting to know a person. You really only see the good stuff. They like the same kinds of things that you do, and they talk about all this interesting stuff, and if they come up in your memory memories later, they always seem to have bright, clean teeth and perfect hair and this big smile on. But Hey Arnold and plenty of other more adult entertainment is closer to the experience of knowing a person for months, then years, then lots of years, until you've had time to notice their problems and faults and the weird discoloration that's just above their left ear and how quickly they heat up when someone mentions the brave little toaster. Both of these experiences can be nice in very different ways, but the latter, learning more and more and more about a person, can be really special. For me, this explains why Hey Arnold was unique. It felt realistic while also letting me examine very real problems from a safe distance. It's not just about the realism, but the compassion with which that realism was conveyed. I guess if there's a call to action here, it would be for animators, screenwriters working in TV, I guess, or really if there's anybody out there who happens to work in children's entertainment in some form, even though I kind of doubt my current audience reaches quite that far, but who knows? Your characters feel real when they act like real people, and none of them deserve to be looked down on, even the ones that you don't like and that your audience isn't supposed to like. When kids see that a show respects its character situations, no matter what that situation is, there's a really good chance that they'll feel respected too, like they're being heard and represented in some way. This is how entertainment can be something more without drifting into the barren wasteland of bad edutainment. There's an in-between space here, one that Hey Arnold discovered for us 20 years ago. Well, it says in the script this is the outro part, but there's nothing written there, so I'll scratch my chin. And how you doing? What's going on? It's very humid here. There's a website. I write some stuff on the website. You can check that out. I usually leave a link in the description, but I don't know if people check the descriptions. I don't know if that's the cool thing to do anymore. Oh, hey, it's that dog. It's that dog I like. What a pretty dog.